Welcome to the lesson, Autoflight Operation. Manual mode selections are made at the Mode Control Panel, MCP, by push buttons. There is an on light in the mode select buttons, except in the thrust button, illuminating if the selection led to an activation or arming of the respective mode. Whenever pilot flying, PF, requires an FGS mode change, it is recommended that he makes or requests the mode change. Both pilots must be aware and check that the change is confirmed at the FMA on the PFD. Autopilot engagement and disengagement shall be announced by PF. New modes flash for 5 seconds after the mode change at the FMA. When the thrust mode is changed or a new mode is armed, the annunciation does not flash. The aircraft is operated so that the nav1 sources and the left barrel corrected altitude are used when pilot flying. PF is in the left seat. The nav2 sources and the right barrel corrected altitude are used when PF is in the right seat. Speeds are set in the MCP speed window labeled IAS Mach. Selections from 80 knots up to VMO, MMO, which equals 300 knots respective, Mach 0.72 or 0.73, depending on certification, are possible. At speeds above VMO, MMO, or maximum gear flaps extended speeds, a flashing solid box appears in the speed window. Vertical speeds are set at the MCP via a thumb wheel. A digital readout of this value is given in display window above this thumb wheel. Vertical speeds between minus 7,900 and plus 6,000 feet per minute can be entered. Altitudes are set in the MCP altitude window. Selections from 0 to 50,000 feet are possible. Pilots are responsible to observe the maximum operating altitude, which is either 31,000, 33,000, or 35,000 feet, depending on the installed pressurization controller. Headings are set in the heading window from 0 to 359 degrees, normally reference to magnetic north. At high latitudes, the reference is changed to true. This is covered in the IRS module. Selected headings are repeated in the ND. When in lateral modes other than heading and the FGS turns the aircraft, the pilot sets the heading bug to current aircraft heading manually. This has no effect from a technical point of view, but might become important when engagement of the heading mode suddenly becomes necessary due to a FGS mode failure. Note that the alpha floor protection always depends on the engagement of the auto throttle. If it is not engaged, the aircraft can be easily flown below and above certified speeds, though it is the pilot who is responsible to ensure compliance with safe speeds. During climb, an automatic changeover from IAS to Mach occurs at flight level 245. During descent, this automatic changeover occurs at flight level 235. Note that the automatic changeover does not lead to compliance with standard climb and descent speed schedules. The pilot has to ensure the correct speeds by manual changeover using the MCP CO button. Before flight, V1, VR, and VFTO have been inserted in the TRP. V2 is set on the MCP in the VCell window. The initial altitude or flight level is entered in the altitude window on the MCP. Before takeoff, the flight directors are switched on. Remember that the flight director, which is switched on at first, becomes the master. Here, number 1 is master, so altimeter, VOR, and GNS-X, GNS-XLS, or GNLU number 1 are the sensors the flight director is referring to. The auto throttle is also armed before takeoff. The arm state is checked at the top left of the FMA. AT is shown in white. The thrust rating, here TO max, is also shown in white, independent of auto throttle engagement. The flight director basic modes on ground, takeoff, TO as vertical mode, and track, TRK, as lateral mode are shown in green to indicate they are active. Once airborne, the flight director provides guidance to maintain the reference track stored at 80 knots during takeoff roll with a bank of maximum 10 degrees. If engaged, the autopilot provides parallel rudder in track mode. In this mode, the autopilot has full authority of the rudder and can also compensate for a failed engine. Parallel rudder is also available during the latter stages of ILS approaches if Cat 3 status is achieved by the flight guidance system, We will see that later in this module. The vertical takeoff mode will provide flight director or autopilot guidance to maintain a speed of V2 plus 10 knots if all engines are operating. If an engine failure has been sensed by the FGS at or below V2, this mode controls speed to V2. Should the engine fail above V2, the actual speed with a maximum of V2 plus 10 knots will be commanded. Now we commence our takeoff roll and set the thrust levers to a vertical position. When 45% N1 is set, a toga button is pressed, and the auto throttle is engaged in the selected thrust mode, which is confirmed by AT and the thrust mode turning green. The thrust levers will now automatically advance to the selected thrust rating. This procedure is also valid when taking off with automatic throttle off. As AT is not armed, the field in the FMA remains blank, but the thrust rating is displayed in white. Advance the thrust levers to a vertical position and press a toga button above 45% N1. The thrust mode turns green, which is checked on the FMA. Now it is the pilot's task to advance the thrust levers. The FADEC trim arrow will assist. When the aircraft accelerates through 80 knots on takeoff roll, the FGS thrust, commands, and auto throttle servos are frozen until 350 feet radio altitude. Note that this is also the speed when the reference for the track mode is taken. Once airborne and above 350 feet radio altitude, lateral, vertical, and other thrust modes become available, and FADEC and auto throttle are unfrozen. Auto throttle reverts to the arm state, and autopilot engagement is available 10 seconds after liftoff. The autopilot is engaged by pressing one of the two AP Engage buttons on the MCP, Nav 1 or 2. Nav 1 is used when the captain is pilot flying. Nav 2 if that is the first officer. On this flight, a captain is PF, and so Nav 1 is pressed to engage the autopilot. Engagement is confirmed by AP in green at the FMA, and ON is lit in the button at the MCP. When passing the all engines acceleration altitude, the speed is set to 210 knots, respective 200 knots for the RJ-70 at the MCP. As the vertical mode is still takeoff, the aircraft will lower the nose to accelerate and